The most famous 34 seconds in the history of flight were filmed by newsreel crews who had turned up to shoot a routine landing. May 6, 1937. Lakehurst, New Jersey. A naval air station on a wet Thursday evening. They were waiting for the Hindenburg. It is difficult now to convey how large this thing was. 804 feet from nose to tail. Nearly 3 times the length of a Boeing 747. It remains the largest object ever to fly. Inside, it was not an aircraft. It was an ocean liner that happened to be in the sky. There was a dining room with white linen and fresh flowers. A lounge with a grand piano built out of aluminium to save weight. Promenade decks with windows you could open in flight. A one-way fare was $400, at a time when a new car cost around $600. This was travel for people who did not ask the price. The crossing took roughly 60 hours from Frankfurt. Passengers slept in cabins with hot and cold running water and were woken by a steward. The engines hung outside the hull in their own cars, and mechanics climbed out along ladders in flight to reach them. Passengers walked carpeted corridors past a reading room and a bar. 36 of them on this crossing, looked after by 61 crew. And there was a smoking room. On a ship holding 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen, there was a pressurized smoking lounge, sealed behind an airlock, with a single electric lighter chained to the wall so that nobody could carry a flame out of it. That is how confident they were. The Hindenburg was never designed to fly on hydrogen. It was built for helium, which does not burn. But almost all the world's helium came out of the United States, and the Helium Control Act of 1927 had made it illegal to export. Germany asked. The United States, watching what the Nazi government was becoming, refused. So the largest flying machine ever built was filled with the most flammable gas there is, because of a decision made in Washington about a country nobody yet trusted. And for a while, it did not matter. Through 1936 the Hindenburg crossed the Atlantic and back 17 times without incident. It carried passengers to Rio and to New York. It flew over the Olympic Stadium in Berlin. On the tail fins were painted swastikas. The ship was a flying advertisement for the new Germany, and it was treated as one. Commercial airship travel worked. It was faster than a liner and more comfortable than anything with wings. What almost nobody said out loud was that rigid airships already had a terrible record. Britain's R-101 had come down in France in 1930. The American Navy had lost the Shenandoah, the Akron, and the Macon. Airships were not safe. They were merely comfortable. The 1937 season opened with a crossing from Frankfurt on the 3rd of May. It should have reached Lakehurst on the morning of the 6th. Headwinds put it hours behind. Then thunderstorms closed over New Jersey, and the captain, Max Pruss, took the ship out over the coast to wait the weather out. By early evening the front had passed. The field radioed that conditions were improving. At just after 7 o'clock the Hindenburg came back over Lakehurst in light rain. Pruss brought it in high and fast, dropping its ropes from altitude rather than being walked down by the ground crew. At 21 minutes past 7 the mooring lines went down into the wet grass. On the ground, a radio reporter from Chicago named Herbert Morrison was recording a description of the landing onto a disc, for broadcast the following day. He was describing the ship's beauty when it began. Somewhere near the stern, above the port fin, a flame appeared. Witnesses described it as a small flicker, like a gas jet. Some said it looked blue. Then the whole rear of the ship went up. 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen does not so much explode as burn, extremely fast, and straight upward. The stern dropped. The bow rose, and fire came out of the nose like a chimney. Inside, passengers who had been leaning out of the promenade windows waving found themselves looking down at the ground. Some of them jumped. The ones who jumped early, from 100 feet, mostly died. The ones who waited until the hull settled walked out of it. The ground crew, dozens of men holding the ropes, ran. Most of them made it. From the first flame to the wreck lying on the field took about 34 seconds. Morrison, still recording, stopped describing and started shouting. He said the ship was bursting into flames. He said it was crashing. He told his engineer he had to stop for a moment because he had lost his voice. The line people remember is 4 words long. Oh, the humanity. 97 people were on board. 62 of them survived. 35 died on the ship, 13 passengers and 22 crew, and 1 man on the ground was killed by falling wreckage. 36 in total. Most of the deaths were burns, or the fall. The survival rate is the detail that surprises people. Almost 2/3 of those aboard a burning airship walked away from it, because hydrogen burns upward and the hull held its shape long enough to reach the ground. The youngest survivor was a 14-year-old cabin boy, Werner Franz. A water ballast tank above him split open and soaked him as the ship came down, and he climbed out through a hatch. He lived until 2014. Werner Dunner, 8 years old, was thrown clear by his mother. He was the last living survivor when he died in 2019. Captain Pruss went back into the wreck to pull people out, was burned across his face, and survived. The official inquiries never settled the cause with certainty, and people argue about it still. The explanation that has held up best is a static discharge. The ship had flown through a storm front. Its outer skin was electrically isolated from the metal frame beneath, so as it sat in the rain a voltage difference built up between them. A spark, and hydrogen already leaking from somewhere in the stern. But the argument about the spark has always mattered less than the argument about the gas. A helium ship struck by the same spark lands normally, and nobody outside New Jersey ever hears about it. The Graf Zeppelin II was finished after the disaster. It never carried a paying passenger. Airship travel ended that evening. Not because the technology failed more often than aeroplanes did, but because this failure happened in front of the cameras, and everybody saw it. There is one more reason this particular fire stayed famous. 48 people died on a British airship 7 years earlier and almost nobody alive can name it. Everything about the Hindenburg was an argument that this was the future. It took 34 seconds to end that argument, and it has never been reopened.